All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for sticking around for one of the last topics of the day. My name is Chris Hetzler. I'll talk a little bit about my background and stuff, and this is a presentation that I also did at the Fabric Conference a few weeks ago about lessons that I learned and my organization learned about transitioning to Fabric from Azure Data Factory pipelines and Azure SQL databases for their data warehousing. So a little bit about me first. I'm a solution architect and senior manager at Eide Bailly, technical consulting. I'll talk about Eide Bailly on the next slide a little bit. Bachelor's degree in computer science, a master's in software engineering, master's in data science. I do hold 25 now after build, Microsoft certifications, including the DP6 and 700s, the two Fabric certs that are out. I spent 17 years at Microsoft as a developer, a tester, a program manager, cloud solution architect, a consultant, and a technical sales professional. And that was up until 2022. That's when I left to join Eide Bailly. I work across the entire Microsoft ecosystem, except for modern work. We have another solution architect who handles all the modern work stuff. Him and I work very closely together, but I do everything else. Dynamics, Power Platform, Fabric, Azure, you name it. I get involved with it. LinkedIn profile is there, also my blog, and then a link to Eide Bailly's Microsoft practice information. So Eide Bailly, who are we? Eide Bailly is a top 15 CPA firm and business consulting firm. What does that have to do with technology? About 20 years ago, Eide Bailly realized through their business advisory practice that a lot of the people that they were helping to gain efficiencies in their business had technology problems. So it was a natural fit to also spin up a technology consulting practice. That has evolved over the years. There is just about nothing in the technology landscape that we don't consult on. We don't get heavily involved in things like custom websites or anything like that. We can't do it. It's just not where we like to focus. We're much more on business process and how technology can streamline a business, help them gain efficiencies or solve any problems that they're having. And as you'll see, this slide isn't really Microsoft specific, and that's because we are the #2 NetSuite reseller in the world. We are also in the top 5 Salesforce resellers and implementers in the world. But we also do Dynamics CRM, and we do Dynamics Business Central, and we do Power Platform, and we do Fabric, and we do Azure. And we're rapidly expanding and growing our Microsoft practice. As you can see, we are in the list of Fabric featured partners. We are qualified for that. We do present the Dashboard in a Day and Fabric in a Day trainings as well on behalf of Microsoft. We're certified to do those things as well. We do have several apps, or not apps, but several offers in the marketplace out on AppSource. If you're interested, you can just search for Eide Bailly. All of our offers will appear there. So what are we going to talk about? This entire presentation is based on a client that I have that I can't name because we don't have that disclosure agreement with them. But this entire presentation is going to be sort of where we started, where we are, and where we're going with the project to get them off of ADF and Azure SQL databases and solely into Fabric. I'll talk a little bit about the planning phase and the proof of concept that we did and how that spoke to the business users who actually own the checkbook and write those checks, and how we convinced them that this was worth their investment. And then we'll have a little time for Q&A, hopefully. As far as timing goes, this was a 45-minute session. We have a half hour, so I might gloss over things or forget some things or go really fast, but we'll try and get it all covered. So some of the objectives of the session is to understand what that migration process looks like. I'm not going to go into the technical details of exactly what we did and what SQL statements had to be transposed and all of that. And that's simply because when we started this project and as we worked through it, all the pipelines that they had in ADF had to be rebuilt in Fabric. There's no way to migrate them. There's no upgrade utility. As you just heard Mark say, that's coming, not there today. And they do have one now that was released at FabCon for Synapse pipelines. These guys weren't using Synapse pipelines. They're using ADF pipelines, slightly different. Talk about how we identified some of the challenges that we were going to face, how we explored the solutions, and then also some of the best practices. And you will also see I have not updated this deck. for things that changed at FabCon. And I haven't updated it on purpose because it shows challenges that we faced, how we overcame them, and how Microsoft has addressed those things moving forward, and just how fast Fabric is evolving. So who is the client? They are a very large international hotel chain. Their size is because they have many brands. They acquire hotel chains. They gobble them up. So there's a lot of hotel brands out there that they actually own that you would never know was owned by them because they don't rebrand, they don't change anything, which also means any of you who work in this landscape know they don't change any of their technology either. Someone from their IT department has to figure out how to get the data from over there into here. They're not going to integrate them. They're not going to change their systems, nothing like that. So there's a lot of data silos in this organization, lots. Their needs from an analytics perspective were both real time and then also batch. So they had needs for both. They get booking information from multiple different systems and multiple different websites, and they get daily feeds from checkouts at all their various properties. What they had done in the past was build a data warehouse using Azure SQL and ADF pipelines. They have a lot of that batch information that lands in Azure Blob Storage. Some of it's actually encrypted, so they have Azure functions that run on those blobs when new ones appear, decrypt that data, land it in another blob. This is a very high-level overview of what their original architecture was like. So there's, as you can see on the left, there are 17 SQL databases. Most of them are in Azure, not all of them. Some of them are on-prem, but most of them are Azure SQL. And then the real-time feeds are coming out of Azure SQL databases. That middle big box there is their Azure SQL database, right? And as you'll see, there are arrows going into it from multiple different places. And then they also use their heavy users of Tableau. They are slow. Power BI is slowly going viral within their company right now among the analysts. But we enabled Tableau. That was not a discussion we had. They said Tableau has to be able to be used, and I'll talk about that when we talk about the POC, how we solve that. But one of the problems with this architecture is that SQL warehouse is not a full data warehouse. It's analytical and it's transactional. There are transactional systems within the company that use data and tables within this warehouse. Obviously a very bad design, and they know that. And what they wanted to do was figure out a way to migrate those analytical tables out of that database, make this truly transactional to serve those transactional systems and have a true actual data warehouse for their analysis. That was what the technical team wanted, to build on what the panel was discussing about identifying and convincing business users and building a business case. Not only was the technical team experiencing these types of issues and getting support tickets for performance and all kinds of other things that can go on when you mix these two different types of data, the business users were also coming, or the management was coming to that IT group and saying, you're spending $8,000 a month in SQL for a data warehouse. Why? That seems enormously expensive to us. So justify that. And what they found through an analysis that I helped them with as a consultant, they had about 4 or 5, they had over 60 ADF pipelines that run, either scheduled or real time. But they had 4 or 5 that were driving the majority of the cost of their pipelines. Then in their actual Azure SQL database, they had 2 to 3 tables that were growing exponentially every day. Single tables that were hitting terabytes of storage. All the other tables, not doing that. The way Azure SQL works, if you need that larger data set, you need to scale up your database, which also comes with compute. Compute and storage are not separated. So that was also driving their costs up. As their tables grew, they had to increase their database for no other reason than storage. They weren't using any of that compute capacity whatsoever. They wanted to separate that. They wanted to find a technology or a way to separate that, storage and compute. And those analysts were experiencing, when they were actually running their SQL queries or visualizing their reports, they were running into very, very long queries as this data was moving in, and they were trying to operate it at the same time. Many of their analysts were experiencing 2 to 3 hour query times. And when they have to do real-time analytics to know what's going on at a property or make marketing decisions to drive business to a single property, that's not acceptable. They also are a very disjointed organization. Security doesn't talk to the data analysts. The analysts don't talk to the engineers. They're all very siloed. So I came in, we did an initial assessment, and I worked first with the data architect who wanted to change all of this, and I got his ideas. Then I met with the engineers along with him, figured out where their pain points were. Then we brought in the analysts to understand what their problems were. And then finally, the architect and I had a discussion with management. We convinced them to fund it from a point of, let's do a proof of concept. This is a brand new technology, 100% agree with that, right? Let's fund a proof of concept to see if there is going to be a benefit for this. That's where I came in, and I actually migrated 2 of those 5 very large, expensive pipelines. I migrated a handful of those very large tables into a Fabric data warehouse and leveraged the lakehouse for their staging environment and did all the ETL in brand new Azure Data Factory, or excuse me, Fabric Data Factory pipelines. A couple of the technical challenges that we faced: Azure Key Vault not supported. Of course, all of their ADF pipelines stored all their credentials in Key Vault, because that's what you should be doing, right? So for the proof of concept, we had to get those secrets out and just enter the credentials for the service principals. Not ideal, but it's a POC. And I knew that Microsoft was working on that because it was the #1 requested feature. So that's one of those cross that bridge when we get there type of things. And that's exactly what we did. Now that support for Key Vault was released at Fabric Conference, they're rapidly changing all of that over to use their existing Key Vault again. This is another topic that the panel talked about, and that's organizational change. One of the beauties of Fabric is it brings all those different personas together in a single workspace. And it doesn't force the issue of them having to work together, but they realize they need to, right? And that's one of the things that their analysts, one of the selling points for their analysts to transition to Power BI is, hey, we can actually live where the engineers live, and we can speak the same language when what we want to do isn't supported or isn't working, or we have questions about the data, or we want to see what state it's in, or look at some sort of dashboard about where the integrations are. And the engineers had no real-time alerting set up. They didn't want to learn log analytics. They didn't want to set up Azure alerts or any of that. Well, now with Fabric Data Factory pipelines, the last stage of their pipeline is send an email when something fails. Send me a Teams alert when something fails. So we did develop a migration strategy. This is all documented internally on their Confluence site. It evolved over time. Fabric moves so fast, and this project was moving so fast, it was not set in stone, right? We had an idea, these were the tables, these were the pipelines, these were the people. That changed. We met every week. I still meet with them every week for a weekly status. That changes with time, and that's okay. That's a good thing. This was not an organization that was used to that. They were very waterfall. Fabric, again, in my mind, forces a transition to more agile practices, because that's its intent, to be able to rapidly change things. That also made the teams, and they have different teams all around the world that are working on this, communicate better and more frequently, and leverage things like Teams or daily stand-ups to actually ask questions of each other and learn from each other. So we had the POC phase. We identified what's going to be the highest return on investment, and then took that to management when they said, where are you at with all this stuff? We said, well, here's the POC. Here's these here's these 2 pipelines that took several hours, almost actually, by the time we actually got them finally migrated, those ADF pipelines, some of them were running over 25 hours. And here they are in Fabric running in less than an hour, doing the same work. Then so they said, that's great. How much does it cost? And we said, well, in Azure, this one particular pipeline is, I think that the worst one was burning about $1,500 a month just to run that pipeline. And I let them know, well, it's not sort of apples to apples. In Fabric, you need to just talk about what capacity you're on to get that performance. They were on an F4, which is the second smallest. Now, that was for POC. Right now, they've reserved an F16 right now, and they're talking about moving up to a reserve 32 in their near future. But that's as more of this grows out and they get off of their legacy system. So then we brought in the analysts and said, hey, here's the SQL endpoint for the new Fabric Data Warehouse. You can point Tableau at a SQL endpoint with your Entra ID credentials. So that's what they started doing. We actually watched one of the engineers, data engineers at the company, actually set up and recorded a video of this. He had SSMS up attached to the Fabric Data Warehouse, and he had SSMS up attached to their existing warehouse in Azure SQL, and had an analyst run a query against both of them, 2 different instances of Tableau running a query. And he recorded it because the Azure Data, I keep saying Azure Data Factory, the Fabric Data Warehouse executed that query this is going to sound made up, executed that query in 500 milliseconds. And it's the same data set. It took that query, the same query against the same data in Azure SQL, over an hour. That's why he recorded it, to prove that that was actually the performance gains that management could see and the analysts could see by fully funding this project, right? And so it's about convincing the people who have the checkbook that this is going to benefit not just them, but everybody in the organization. And that's what they did. And they did a very good job of evangelizing that. So in the end, this slide just shows a little bit of all the different technologies out there. They actually have SFTP servers that their pipelines hit. One of the questions that I get quite a bit about this project is, why didn't you land all the data in Fabric? Why are you still using Azure Blobs? And the answer to that is, it's an iterative process, and we didn't want to impact the producers of that data. We didn't want to go to those 20 or so different services or entities and say, you need to change the endpoint that you're dropping your data at. By going this route, we didn't have to do that. They're going to eventually. They are eventually going to get all that unstructured data into their lakehouse in the file section. But they had a place to pick it up from, so let's just use that for now, and it doesn't impact anybody upstream, right? So the validation strategies and how we monitored consistency, luckily, they have a lot of stored procedures that they had already built in their data warehouse that they can run to make sure things are in good order. We simply migrated those to stored procedures in the Fabric data warehouse. Syntax was slightly different. Not everything that SQL supports is yet supported in Fabric Data Warehouse, and you have to be mindful of that. But the tools do a very good job of saying, hey, that's not supported right now. And now with Copilot, you can actually ask it, what should I do instead? I have this syntax that's not supported or these keywords that I'm trying to execute. I know it doesn't work. What should I do? And it can actually quite accurately now rewrite them for you. So they are in a supported format and use supported keywords. They also had log validation. They're very, very heavy loggers of everything in between stage and as data moves through their pipelines. We replicated that using Lakehouse rather than storing log data in their data warehouse. We store that in Lakehouse tables. And they actually have validation scripts that run in Python and execute those stored procedures to make sure that their logs are valid too. One of the things that we ran into and why we use Lakehouse for staging is lossy type transformation. Type information was lost if we were just going straight from their Azure SQL into a Fabric data warehouse. So we stage into the Lakehouse so we can preserve that type information. This strategy actually prevented any downtime, because as we were migrating that data across, the analysts were still using the legacy system, and as those pipelines were done and validated, we told them, okay, now it's time to migrate, and we sort of did it by chunks of data. They know that their analyst XYZ uses these 6 tables. This group of analysts is more interested in these tables. So that's when we actually started migrating into production and weren't doing a POC. That's how they prioritized what to move and when to move it. So this is just where I talk about security a little bit. The Key Vault wasn't supported. It is now. When we initially started, all of those, they are very well secured. All of those Azure storage accounts had private endpoints. They weren't publicly exposed. So we first used private endpoints in Fabric when that came out to connect to them. Then managed identity came out. We rapidly switched to that. So all of that is authenticated through managed identities now, which is awesome. So the success of this project, I really think, is based on the fact that we did that proof of concept, and that allowed the individual internal stakeholders, not a consultant, to go to management and say, listen, these are the benefits that you will get from investing in this. And the other thing that they are doing and have been doing for a while now is as those ADF pipelines are migrated and the data is there and has been validated through UAT testing with their analysts, they turn those ADF pipelines off. So when the project first started, we had spending in ADF and Azure up here, and Fabric had to be kept at a minimum. Management said that. We don't want you to add any more money than you absolutely have to. But as the project has gone on, the scales are tipping, and they're estimating that instead of when it's all done, spending $8,000 a month for their warehouse in Azure, they're going to be around what was the last estimate? Around $3,000 a month for Fabric. Huge cost savings for them, which is what management wanted. Huge efficiency gains in their process and being responsive to their end users' needs, and huge gains in performance. It's very rare you get all 3 of those things together. But that's why we're at Eide Bailly so bullish on Fabric, is because we are seeing that, and it's not just these clients. And I wanted to address one quick thing too. This is a very large customer of ours. It's one of our largest. But there was a question asked about how does this apply to like small and mid-market people. That's where we live as Eide Bailly. Our consultancy, our client base is SMB and SMC, small and medium businesses, small and medium corporate. We play in the enterprise space here and there as needed, but that's not where our consultants live and breathe. We deal with small and medium-sized businesses all day long, every day. And that comes from Eide Bailly's client base. That's what the accounting side and the tax and audit side are very focused on. 100,000 or so clients across the country. And so I can give, if you want to talk about it offline or ask questions, I can give you lots of examples of small and medium businesses that have leveraged the heck out of this to do really, really cool and interesting things as soon as it came out. We have at Eide Bailly a very large data and analytics practice that was very heavy on Snowflake. They still do a lot of Snowflake. They do their best to be technology agnostic. But when a client specifically asks for Microsoft, or we get a lead from Microsoft as a Microsoft partner, this is where we go, is Fabric. And they actually are very rapidly changing their mindset as well, because they have data that's generated by all these Microsoft systems, Business Central, CRM, Office, all of that, that's landing in Azure storage. Then they were using ADF pipelines to push it into Snowflake. And then they were taking Power BI and reporting on Snowflake. So they're like, why do we have this third party in here when we can now move to this? And a lot of their clients, existing Snowflake clients, they've actually turned on mirroring. And they're actually mirroring into Fabric from Snowflake now and leveraging and switching their pipelines to be Fabric pipelines and just getting everything done in Fabric. With that, we've got about 5 minutes. Any questions? Yes. Mm-hmm. Say that again?
There were two key benefits of moving from paper to
Mhm.
Fabric.
Oh, sure.
One was pricing.
Yeah,
right?
the
So
three.
those-
Yeah, the three benefits of moving to Fabric from where they were at. The biggest one for everybody concerned was the cost savings, right? The next one is the performance improvement. Everything that they were doing in ADF and Azure SQL that they have replicated in Fabric, they have seen a performance increase. Some more dramatic than others. Some were huge, like the example I gave of a 1 hour query going down to 500 milliseconds. They aren't all that big, but they have said they have not seen a degradation in anything. Everything is either the same or faster than it was. And then the last part was just the team collaboration and the ability of all these people to be much more efficient to get their work done. The ability for analysts to talk to engineers, speak the same language, be in the same canvas and the same workspace.